Good evening. Thank you for coming to our Arts and Culture Council presentation tonight. Really appreciate that you're here. We do have a online and virtual presentation going on at the same time, so if we have any difficulties, please bear with us. My name is Helen Forrest. I'm part of the Arts and Culture Council, and we help the library plan presentations and the art exhibits like you would see here tonight. So before I introduce our speaker tonight, I'd like to mention a couple of things coming up. Celebrating the colors black and white, and in the gallery we have an annual color-themed exhibit, art exhibit, and it's open to anyone to attend. The applications are here at the library or online. And the deadline for applying is the 2nd of February. The other event you might be interested in is Learn to Paint for people of all ages. Join local artist Tyler Boyle for a beautiful paint along with winter scene. It's $20 per person, and all of your materials would be supplied. And again, we'd like you to register on the website so that they have an idea of how many people are coming. And that date is February the 11th. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Ken. Many of you will know Ken. He was formerly the CAO here at the library and then more recently at the Collingwood Library. But as a teacher and librarian and writer, he has done many things. And you may be familiar with his book. I'm just going to check the title here. Right, Under the Holy Lake, a memoir of Eastern Bhutan, and more recently, On Foot to Canterbury, and he was a finalist for the 2021 Hilary Weston Writers' Trust Award. So Ken is going to talk to us today about his experiences, and he has agreed to donate any money collected tonight, plus his honorarium, to give back to the school where he did work. So please join me in welcoming Ken Haigh.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Yes, it is. There you go. I just have to speak a little louder, I guess. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you very much for the introduction, Helen. The Arts Council does a wonderful job at the library. I know they were looking for new members. Are you still looking for new members? They are. I see them nodding. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, as she mentioned, they manage the monthly gallery shows. They also bring in speakers like myself. So if that's something that would interest you, maybe talk to Helen at the end and if that's the kind of thing because it's a great volunteer job if you're interested in helping in the community. Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about Sikkim. I called the title Sikkim, Hidden Gem of the Himalayas because one of the translations of Sikkim, or one of the names for Sikkim in Tibetan, is Hidden Valley. So there's a tradition in the Himalayas, in the Tibetan culture, that there are certain places in the Himalayas that are these hidden valleys, and that's where James Hilton got the idea for Shangri-La, for Lost Horizon, if you remember reading that book or seeing that movie. So Sikkim was one of those places traditionally. So that's why I decided to use that title, and I know there's water right here. So I get to try out all the technology tonight. This is like I'm the guinea pig because this is being live streamed at home. I think it's also being taped. I've also got a fancy. Look at that! It actually works. So, why Sikkim? Why did I go to Sikkim? I'll let you know because many years ago, as Helen mentioned, I taught in Bhutan. So my first real job, graduating university, was as a high school teacher in Eastern Bhutan. That's me, right there, with the banjo. No, I haven't changed a bit. Hair's a little whiter, yeah. So that's the school in the background. And it was probably the most rewarding job I ever did, to be honest. I was also had something to do with the fact that I was 25, and it was my first real job and my first real chance to go anywhere in the world. So it was a really great experience. So I retired a year ago, as Helen said, from the Collingwood Public Library. And I was looking to do something like that again. So I thought I'd like to teach, I'd like to volunteer, I'd also like to go back to the Himalayas because it was a part of the world that I really loved, and I really liked the mountains and the scenery, but I also really liked the culture. it was really interesting. So I started looking online to see what was available. If you're interested in doing that kind of thing and you Google search it, you'll find that there's lots of places that are looking for volunteers in the Himalayas. The problem is, I think, is that some of them are better than others. If any of you have read Little Princes by Connor Gresham, I think is his name, you'll know that there's a book about a fellow who went to Nepal to volunteer in an orphanage, discovered that the kids weren't actually orphans, that they'd been kidnapped, and that it was kind of a front for getting money out of tourists who wanted to come over and do good works, right? So you have to be careful when you look into your volunteer agencies. So I did a bit of looking, and some are there's nothing wrong with them, but they're really volunteerism agencies, right? You go over, you do a few days of work, and then you go off on a trek and have a good time. There's really nothing wrong with that if that's what you're interested in. But I really wanted to volunteer and spend some time helping out. So I looked around, and I found this group. So it's called the Himalayan Education Lifeline Program. It's a terrible, terrible title, but I think they picked it so that it would make a sharp, sort of snappy acronym, right? HELP. So, but they turned out to be the real thing. So there's only 3 people who were running it at the time. The fellow who founded it had been a UN volunteer in Nepal, and later worked for the British Council. And when he retired, he wanted to do something to give back, so he started up this organization. And what they do basically is pair up teachers with schools who need teachers. They're looking for at least a 2-month commitment. Basically, you foot all the bills yourself, so you have to get yourself there, you have to get your visa. They'll put you with a host family, but you have to give the host family a little bit of money so they're not out of pocket. And then at the end, you give a donation to the school. So it's not a huge amount of money, but there is some money up front. But what I really liked about it was they want people to go and teach. They're not looking for tourists. They were looking for people who are willing to go for a couple of months and work in a school and teach. And so their target really is retired elementary school teachers, people who have some experience who are looking to do something for a couple of months and they really want to help out. So if any of you are retired elementary school teachers, I can highly recommend it. And that's the email address at the bottom. So where is Sikkim? First of all, has anybody here been to Sikkim? No? You know, when I first went to Bhutan, nobody knew where Bhutan was. I didn't know where Bhutan was. I thought it was in the Middle East. And then it turns out it was in Asia. Well, it was, who knew? But nowadays, more and more people are going to Bhutan. Lots of people have been to Nepal. But I haven't met a single person who's actually been to Sikkim. But I knew where it was. And I'll show you in a minute why. But also because I was in Bhutan for 2 years. You can see Sikkim is that little red area right there that's squeezed between Bhutan and Nepal. And Tibet is kind of on the north. This empty spot here is Bangladesh. So the rest is India. Sikkim is the 2nd smallest state in India. The smaller state is Goa. And it's the least populated state in India. And it's completely within the mountains of the Himalayas. Or Himalayas, as they say over there. We say Himalayas, they say Himalayas. Tomato, tomato. So it's a beautiful spot. And I hunted and hunted for a map of Sikkim, and this was the best one I could find. Unfortunately, it's all blurry because it's all blown up now. But that's the state of Sikkim. And look at this, I even have a laser pointer. So this point all around here, these are all the highest mountains of the Himalayas. They sort of circle the state. The whole state is mountains, but it's lower in the middle. And that's because this river sort of drains the whole state. That's the Tista. And that right there, Kanchenjunga, is the 3rd highest mountain in the world. So I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And where I was down right about there where that red dot is. So that's Tatang. That's where my school was. But I flew in down here in Siliguri. I stayed a day or 2 in Darjeeling, and then drove in on a road to there. And unfortunately, I went in August and September, which is the monsoon season. So I don't have the greatest pictures in the world, and I've tried to supplement them with other pictures that I've stolen off the internet. Because it rained every day I was there, and some days torrential rain, right? And the problem with going to Sikkim in the rainy season, something I wouldn't recommend, is the roads were always washing out. But they're really quick at getting them back. I have to give them credit. A day or 2 and they were all running again. But everywhere you went, there were landslides and roads were blocked. So I had the worst drive in the world because we got about halfway to my school and we hit a landslide and we couldn't get through. And we were talking to people working to clear it, and they said, well, if you go back down the road about 1 kilometer and there's a road that goes up the mountain, follow that, it'll take you around. Well, the road literally went up the mountain, and it was gravel, and we were in a little car like a Nissan Micra, right? With wheels this big. And we were going boom, 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 up this mountain, back and forth, back, but we made it. I couldn't believe that we made it. I thought for sure we were gonna rip the bottom out of that car, but we made it all the way over that mountain. So we got in. The thing too about Sikkim is because it has these high mountains all the way around, the monsoon rains come up from the Bay of Bengal here and up here. So it's actually the wettest place in the Himalayas as well. So a lot of rain gets dumped there for 4 months, which makes it a very, very lush state. You'll see some pictures in a minute. There's lots of greenery, lots of flowers, lots of flowering plants. But it was also a trade route. So people would come up from India and they would go through this pass over here in Netula, and that would take them up into Tibet. And the first people to make attempts at Everest, Mallory and Irving, they started down here in Darjeeling, and they got porters and they went up through here and all the way around to the back end of Everest to try and climb. So this was for a long time the way into Everest for people who were trying to climb Everest before Nepal opened it up to other climbers. Now most of them come up the other direction. Enough said about that, I guess. So I think I don't want to take a long time, but I think most people don't know that much about Sikkim, so I thought I would sort of try and do the history in a really quick nutshell. So Sikkim has had a very kind of sad history, to be honest, because it's this tiny little state that was constantly being invaded by its neighbors, and it relied on other neighbors to help them out to push everybody back out again, as you'll see in a minute. So the earliest inhabitants were called the Lepchas. They were a tribal people. They were animists. Their ancestors still live in Sikkim. And there were other tribal groups like Limbus, who lived close to my school, Magars, who lived a little further south, and they were mostly animists, and they were sort of tribal people, agriculturalists who lived in Sikkim. But then in about the 14th century, Tibetans started coming in from the north and settling. So they were looking for land. They settled in the different valleys. And in 1642, by this point, Buddhism had come into there were big monasteries set up. 3 of the most important lamas in Sikkim got together and said, we need to do something about setting up a government. And they had a council, and they selected somebody, Phuncho Namgyel, and he became the first king of Sikkim. So his ancestors, after that, were the hereditary monarchs of Sikkim. And then in 1790, you can see the Bhutanese invaded Sikkim. I never think of the Bhutanese as aggressors, but they were. They invaded Sikkim to try and set up a rival monarch. And the Sikkimese army, the small Sikkimese army, needed help, so they called in the Tibetans, and they came down and drove the Bhutanese back into Bhutan. And then the Nepalese started coming in from the other side and invading, and they needed help from the Chinese. And the Chinese came down and pushed the Nepalese back, but not all the way back, so they lost some of their territory. And then in 1815, the British Raj was fighting against the Gurkhas, and they defeated the Gurkhas, and they restored that land back to Sikkim. But in the process, they became more involved in the politics of Sikkim, and so in 1890, Sikkim became a protectorate of British Raj. So then when Indian independence comes along, in 1947, India assumed that role. Nehru was a big supporter of an independent Sikkim. Unfortunately, in the 50s, in 1950, China invaded Tibet, and in 59, the Dalai Lama left. There started to be a lot of conflicts between India and the Chinese. And there were a number of small little battles fought along the border between India and China. And so India was looking at Sikkim saying, this is a weak point along here. If the Chinese are going to invade, they're going to come through Sikkim. We need to do something about this. So they started stationing lots of troops in Sikkim. So there's tens of thousands of Indian troops stationed in Sikkim and big army bases, and there still are, because they were worried about this. But the leader at that point was Indira Gandhi, and she didn't have the same faith in the government of Sikkim that Nehru had. So she was looking at ways to do something about that. And in the 50s and 60s, what started to happen was you started to see more of a movement for representative government. It had been an absolute monarchy. Slowly they'd introduced some advisory councils and things, but what the people of Sikkim mostly wanted was they wanted, like we have, a representative government where people are elected to represent people in the government. And the king was resisting that. The reason he was resisting that was because in the 19th century, a lot of Nepalese moved to Sikkim looking for land. A lot of them came to the Darjeeling area to work in the tea gardens for the British, and their ancestors settled there. And so what happened was, by the time we're in the 50s and 60s, more than half the population of Sikkim is actually of Nepalese descent. So they vastly outnumber the Tibetans, who are the ruling class. And so they want more say in government. And unfortunately, what happened was the Indian government played on that. They assisted the They assisted the protesters, they gave them money, they actually trucked people in. They're pretty sure now they trucked people in for some of the demonstrations to boost the numbers, to make it look worse than it was. And things got kind of dicey. I do want to show you something though, because this is why I remember Sikkim. I was only a year old, but I do remember this later on. I don't remember the marriage, let's put it that way. Let me get my glasses. Yes, I didn't need these when I started here, did I? So. Oh, it's not showing. Tom? Do I need to select a different thing on my screen? Or can you do it from there? I'm seeing something different on my screen than you are. What do I need to do? Sure. There we go. Okay, I thought I would play this because it's kind of fun.
Joy abounds in the tiny Himalayan kingdom of Sikkim on the wedding day of the Maharaja's son to a beautiful American girl. The capital of the 2,800 square mile Indian protectorate is Gangtok. Guests include distinguished visitors from many countries. American Ambassador Galbraith is the witness for the bride. The Maharaja arrives at the Gompa, or Buddhist temple, for the marriage of his son and heir to the New York socialite, Hope Cook. The ceremony is long, impressive, and to Westerners extremely complicated. The bride and groom wear similar rich ceremonial robes. Part of the marriage tradition is the placing of a scarf around the bride's neck. The groom receives his scarf. To their palace walk the crown prince and his future queen, the first Westerner to marry into the royal family. A romance that began in a college field trip reaches its dazzling climax in this exotic kingdom.
There you go. So I thought I would show that because it's just kind of funny. Now I gotta. Oh, no. I gotta go. Okay, so I thought I would show you that little film clip because I was only a year old when they got married. That was 1963, but I do remember when the king gets deposed. So in 1975, a new parliament came in Sikkim. There was a bit more representative government. They approached the Indian government and said, we'd like to abolish the monarchy. So the Indian army moved in, they surrounded the palace, the king was taken away, and Sikkim became a new state of India. So it was no longer an independent country. So in 75, they became the newest state of sort of the government of India, and that was the end of an independent Sikkim. And that's still a bit of a sore point with people today, to be honest, because I was there for Indian Independence Day, and it wasn't a big festival, it was mostly a soccer tournament. So, but I wanted to show you this too, because I mentioned that the Nepalese have become a majority within the country, so you can see that from the languages. So like 63% of the people in Sikkim speak Nepali, almost 60% are Hindu, and almost 30% are Buddhist. And there's a really growing number of Christians. There's a very strong evangelical church in Sikkim. There were 3 house churches in my valley. It's a Presbyterian, Evangelical Presbyterian Church of India. That's the church that's kind of in there. So a lot of my students were Christians, but some of them were Hindus, some of them were Buddhists, some of them were Limbu, so they were a different religion altogether. So it's a very multi-ethnic, religious state, which is why when I went there I was teaching in English. So the government has decided English is the medium of schooling because there's so many different languages and so many different ethnicities. This is actually my son's photo, but it's taken leaving, not coming in. But you get an impression, that's what you see if you're lucky on a good day flying into Sikkim. You can see the Himalayas poking up through the mountains, or through the clouds there. So those are the highest mountains in the world, just sticking up through the clouds. And that is Kachenjunga, right there, third highest mountain in the world. This is Darjeeling, so this is where I spent a couple days before I went to Sikkim. And then you drive over the edge there, and you drop for about 20 minutes. And there's a river, and you cross the river, and you're in Sikkim. So that's how close. My village would have been right in there somewhere, so right up in those hills. So I was at 2,400 meters, so fairly high. And I threw these in just because like I said, I don't have a lot of good pictures because it rained every day. So the state animal is the red panda, if you recognize that. There's supposed to be more red pandas in Sikkim than anywhere else in the world. The state flower is a noble orchid, and there's a lot of orchids in Sikkim, lots of flowering plants. The state tree is rhododendron, which back in the 19th century, the founder of Kew Gardens in London, Joseph Dalton Hooker, did 2 collecting trips in Sikkim and brought back lots of rhododendrons, which he replanted in Kew Gardens. And now most of you, if you have rhododendrons in your yard, probably come from those collecting expeditions ultimately. And lots of butterflies. I've never seen so many beautiful butterflies as I saw in Sikkim everywhere. And the kids are just blasé. It's like I'm going, oh, look at that one, And they're just going, yeah, whatever. So they're all, they're everywhere. So this is the national butterfly, or the state butterfly, which is called the blue duke. And that's my valley. So that's the valley that I lived in. That's the village. This was one of the days it wasn't raining, which is why I ran out. And all my pictures were taken on my wife's old cell phone, so they're not the best. So I was like running around snapping pictures while the sun shined. But you get an impression of just how steep the sides of the hills are. This is what Sikkim looks like everywhere I went. Really steep. It goes way, way, way down to the river. There is a little road that runs along here. I'm standing on the road at this side taking the picture. And I'll show you, you'll see the road in a minute. But flat spaces like that are very rare, so that's the village football pitch right there. So, and this is looking the other way up the valley from behind the school. And you can see the river valley goes up, and it's just really steep. And this building down here was the first school, and it was just a house they rented. When they started in 2004, there were only 15 students. Today there's 110, and more than 30 of those students live in boarding. So it's a little bit more crowded. And I threw these in because these were also taken on my cell phone just to show you what a typical day was like when I was there. You can see all the clouds and the mist. It's very rainy. The economy of Sikkim is based mostly on agriculture, and the big money earner is this plant right here, which is cardamom. So they're one of the biggest growers of cardamom in the world, and that's their cash crop. So if they have a good year and the prices are up, the farmers do pretty well. Unfortunately, this last year was not a good year. The prices were really low, so they weren't doing so well. This right here, these are called tree ferns. Never seen that before. I've seen ferns growing on the ground, but not on the sides of trees. But it's just so wet that these things will grow even on the sides of trees. As I said, there's a lot of flowers in Sikkim. These are ones I took just outside the hostel where I was living. So that's an orchid of some kind. I don't even know what that is, but it was everywhere. And then this is another picture just of the valley. But what I wanted to kind of show you was most of the kids in my school were farmers, or their parents were farmers. So they would be living on farms like this. And you can see it's all terraced. So that's probably rice or other plants. And these are the farms. They're all scattered everywhere. And that's the kind of place where most of my students were living. And this up here, this terrible picture, that's my village from the other side of the valley. So some of the boys and I hiked up to the ridge on the other side of the valley, and then looking back, I took a picture of our village. So you can see the size of it. It's not very big, and the school's like right down there somewhere. And that's the school. So the school was started when parents from this village approached a couple, Rajib and Radhika Tapu. They were teaching in another school about half an hour away, and they approached them and said, would you please come to our village and open a school for our children? So as I said, the first year there was only 15 students, now it's up to 100. The parents pay for it, so they're paying for the teachers' salaries, they're paying for textbooks and things like that. But as I said, they're mostly farmers, so they don't have a lot of money. So this is really stretching things for the parents. But obviously, they think it's important enough that they're willing to invest this kind of money. So they started building a new school in 2012. This is as far as they got. So you can see that they finished the first floor and then ran out of money. So you can see the rebar is still sticking out of the roof here. They plan to add a second floor when they get more money, but right now it's just a temporary structure. And this is our assembly ground at the front where we have morning assembly every day. And that's it looking from up in the school, looking down from that window. So you can see the kids all, this is before school starts. And you can see that up there, that's more cardamom. So everywhere you look, there's little plots of it growing on the sides of the mountains. But you can also see just how steep everything is. So we had a little walkway that we had to walk up here to the road. Actually, the road was higher than these houses, so it was up there. And then we walked down the road for about 5 minutes and down another steps, and that's where the hostel was. And that's the teaching staff. So that's Rajiv, that's Radhika. They're the two that started the school. The women you see all taught the lower grades, so they were teaching upper kindergarten, lower kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2. This fellow here is Vikram, and then Rajiv, Radhika, Vikram, and myself were teaching grades 3 to 8. So I was teaching English to grades 3 to 8, which meant I just basically moved from class to class to class to class all day long, basically just keeping up with the kids, or just keeping a little bit ahead of the kids, because every night I would go home and plan my lessons for the next day, and like going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with these kids tomorrow? And then teach, and then do the same thing day after day. And they work for 6 days a week in India, so it's a 6-day or 6-day school week with 1 day off. So we had Sunday off. I think my next picture is, yeah. So that's where I was staying. This is a room in the dormitory where the kids were living. That bed looks more comfortable than it actually was. So it's just a piece of plywood, and there's a thin quilt on top, which is my mattress. So it's about that thick. So basically you're sleeping on a piece of plywood. My wife, who's sitting over there, is a teacher, and I said, you'd love it. And then I thought, no. You would hate this bed. You would really not like this. And that's the hostel. So they own this building. They bought it, but it really does need some work. So I was staying over here. That was my room, where that door is. This corner room was where the principal and his wife stayed. The back bit is where the girls and the younger boys stayed. This down here is the study hall, where they study at night. And then the older boys were actually staying in the cellar of the house next door. They were renting that space there. So it was very tight. This was the bathhouse. So it's just a concrete room with a drain in the floor, and you'd get a bucket of water and a dipper, and you'd clean yourself. Right beside it was a toilet. There's a big standpipe under here. You can't see it where the water comes up. And then down the hill, about 2 flights of stairs, there was a second toilet. So there were 47 of us sharing 2 toilets and 1 bathroom sort of thing, right? So you can imagine the lines in the morning. Unfortunately, if you're a teacher, you get to move to the front of the line. So the kids would all step aside, good morning, sir, and then you get shooed to the front of the line. But still, it got tiring actually after a while, because the kids are so polite, right? Every time they see you, they say, good morning, sir, good morning, sir. And if you're walking to the bathroom and there's 20 of them there, it's good morning, sir, good morning, sir, good morning, sir. And then you come out of the bathroom, it's good morning, sir, good morning, sir. And this is like every day for 2 months, right? It's fine, you don't have to say good morning anymore. And this, part of the deal was they cooked the meals for me. Radhika and Rajiv not only were the principal and chief English teacher at the school, they also ran the hostel, and Radhika did all the cooking. So for me and for the kids. So basically they were working 7 days a week all the time, without any breaks until a holiday came along and they could send the kids home, right? So but those are momos, just in case. If anybody's been to Nepal, you probably had momos, yes. They're delicious. So it's meat dumplings, and that's a papaya down the bottom. That was my favorite meal, I decided after a while. I really liked momo, so I had to get a picture of it and send that home. And there's the morning assembly. You see all the kids in their school uniforms. Boys and girls line up separately by gradation. The youngest kids at the front and the older ones at the back. The older kids were wonderful. They really looked after the little kids very, very well. They were very responsible, in some ways much more mature than Canadian kids the same age, in some ways much more immature than Canadian, but in a nice way, if you know what I mean. They weren't they were more naive, yes, let's put it that way, but they were very, very responsible and very hardworking. This was on Indian National Day. Our school was called upon to do folk dances to entertain the VIPs, so that's why the kids are all dressed up kind of funny. And it was also a soccer tournament for the local schools, and our school won. So they're actually really, really happy right now because their school just won the tournament. So, but yeah, really delightful kids. This was a really great tradition, and if there's any teachers in the audience, you'll be very, very jealous. In India, the first Monday of September is Teachers' Day. So the school was closed, and the parents and the children put together a program to thank the teachers at the school. So the parents did all the cooking, there was a big feast. The fathers put this up, it's hard to see, but they put a great big awning over our assembly ground because it was a rainy season, it was raining every day and they didn't want it to be rained out. And then this in here was where all of us VIPs sat in nice little comfortable chairs. And the kids had they'd prepared a whole series of entertainment. So there was dancing, there were skits, and it was really great. And I've got some pictures of the dancing. They all look blue because they're under the blue awning. But yes, so these are 3 girls from my class 5, and these are the younger kids. These would be class 4 and 5, and this is 3 and 4, I think, although she's in class 5. But yeah, they were really talented kids, and then this is class 6. It's kind of funny because there's more girls than boys in this class, so this is actually a young lady right here dressed up as a boy with a mustache painted on. So, but they're really talented. And then this is class 7 and 8. So class 8 on the one side, class 7 on the other. I had to learn how to teach mixed classes like that because they only had their school was really tight. They had to squeeze everybody in. So 7 and 8 were in the same class, and I would walk in there and I'd say, okay, class 7, this is what I want you to do, and while you're doing this, class 8, you do this, and then they'd all be going, sir, 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 and I'd be running back and forth. So anybody who's been a teacher in a split class, I sympathize with you because I only did it for 2 months, but it's very hard. But great kids, really wonderful kids. And this is 5 and 6, and they're all supposed to be doing a lesson that I put on the board. My sole teaching props were a whiteboard at the front of the room and their textbooks. That's it. There was no photocopiers, no computers, nothing like that. In fact, many days we didn't have electricity because it was very up and down. It was very erratic. So it called upon you as a teacher to come up with all kinds of, like, how do you get around that? So you have to think of new ways to teach things because you're used to having a photocopier, say, where you can photocopy a bunch of sheets. Well, you don't have that. So what I did was I found an old cracked whiteboard and I'd write all my lessons out, and then I'd carry it on my head like this so that when it rained, it didn't all wash off, and I would get it to school. That's class 3. There's only 7 of them, but they were the biggest handful that I had. Because of COVID, they hadn't been to school in 2 years. So the last time they've been in school, they've been lower kindergarten, and now suddenly they're in grade 3. They can't read their textbooks. And I was supposed to be teaching them, and so that became a real challenge, that class, because they had a lot of energy. And I learned very quickly that they can only have short attention spans, so you have to do lots of things and switch them up really fast and have nice smooth transitions and really clear directions. Otherwise, they're all running around like crazy people around, and you're trying to get them all sat back down again. At the end of the road where we lived was this lake. It was, for the Limbu people, the local people, this was a holy lake. And is become a tourist attraction. So Sikkim is starting a tourist industry. It's still in its growth phases. They don't see many tourists from outside of India, but they do see a lot of tourists from India. So a lot of Indians, Calcutta is not that far away. So if you live in a big city like Calcutta, it must be wonderful to think for a few days I'm going to get up into the mountains and get some fresh air and see something like this. So we had taxis going past our school all the day long, carrying Bengalis up to this lake, which is called Kachapolri, and it was the holy lake of Sikkim. So people were coming up here, they'd do a puja, they'd pray for good fortune, and then turn around and take a taxi back again. And these are all Buddhist prayer flags in here, and there was a monastery just off to the left, right close by. And this was a little monastery that was just built up the road from my school, and you can see the road here. That's what the roads look like. So they're pretty good, actually, but they're single lanes. So, and it's very windy going in and out of around corners. So if you're a driver in Sikkim, you'll notice people are always leaning on the horns. That's to warn oncoming traffic. So as you go around the corner, you're going beep, 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 so that if cars coming the other way, they know you're coming and you don't kind of run into each other as you go. But nobody goes fast because they are so windy. maybe top speed is 40 kilometers an hour. That's as fast as you're going. But because in the rainy season, because it's so steep, you'll often see landslides that block the roads, and then people are out there really quickly shoveling it all away because the villagers want those roads to be open. But this is a new monastery, and I put this in here too because you can see how the construction is done. Because everything's on a steep hillside, it's in multi-layers, and then there's big stilts at the bottom. Or sometimes they'll build a big retaining wall to create a flat space to build a house on. This was across the valley. There was another village called Tingling at the top of the ridge there. And we watched this little structure being built from the school. And so one Sunday, the boys and I said, let's go over and find out what's going on over there. And we hiked up. We thought it was a Buddhist temple. It turned out to be a Limbu temple. So this is an animist shrine. And we happened to arrive on the day they were dedicating it. So there was a big party going on. We got invited in to eat food and got a tour of the temple, which wasn't finished yet, but they were quite proud of it. They were very proud of it. And right behind me was a Christian house church in full swing as well. So we could hear people playing guitars and singing. And so it was very interesting to go on that trip. This is Pema Yangtze. It's one of the bigger monasteries in Sikkim, one of the oldest ones. It was about a half-hour drive from where we were. Unfortunately, the day I was able to visit, it was pouring rain, so it's not the best picture in the world. But the monks there were wonderful. They invited me in, showed me all around. It was great. This is just up from my school, looking down into the valley. It's hard to see, but this right here is a bridge. So you can see, before the road was built, everything was walking trails. And you could see you'd be zigzagging down the hill like this to the bridge, cross the bridge, and then zigzagging up the hill like this to the village, which was up here somewhere. So that trip from our school up to this village, where that Limbu temple was, took us 2.5 hours to walk. Mostly because I was walking, because the boys could spring up and down that hill. But I was like really out of breath. So that's the bridge there. So some of the boys came with me on the bridge. And you can just see how steep everything is. I've never been anywhere, even when I was in Bhutan, the hills were gentler. They weren't so up and down the way they are in Sikkim. And these are some of the girls in the upper kindergarten class. So, and I threw this in just to show you too, like I mentioned, it's a multi-ethnic country, right? I mean, even if you just look at those girls' faces, you can tell that they're coming from different ethnic backgrounds, and yet they all seem to live together quite harmoniously in Sikkim. So, and that is my presentation. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.